A routine day at the bank turns into a humiliating confrontation. A black man calmly attempts to deposit his hard-earned $10,000, only to be met with disbelief and open hostility. The arrogance of the staff escalates into an action that sets the tone for the entire story. "We don't take dirty money here." The words slice through the sterile silence of the bank lobby like broken glass. Heads turned. A few customers paused mid-transaction, while others pretended not to notice, their eyes flicking nervously toward the commotion. Behind the polished counter, the young teller's smirk carried the weight of arrogance that only entitlement could teach. The man at the center of it all stood still, calm, and unbothered. His name was David Carter, a tall black man in his early 40s. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and carried himself with quiet dignity. In his hands was a plain brown envelope, thick with neatly stacked bills. "I said," the teller repeated, louder, her voice dripping with suspicion. "What's a man like you doing with this much cash?" She tilted the envelope back toward him as though it were toxic, her latex-gloved hands trembling with exaggerated disgust. David didn't flinch. The fluorescent lights reflected off his dark skin, his posture as steady as a stone pillar. Around him, whispers grew. An elderly white man near the exit muttered, "Drug money, has to be." A young mother pulled her child a little closer, shielding him as if danger stood before her. The teller leaned closer. $10,000 in cash. Do you expect me to believe this is legal? People like you don't walk in here with this kind of money." David's eyes lowered briefly to the floor, not in shame, but in silent calculation. He remembered his father's words, "Dignity is your loudest weapon." He placed his palms on the counter, steady, deliberate. "I'm here to deposit my money," he said calmly. Each word was measured, precise, as if he were crafting a testimony for history itself. The teller scoffed, signaling to the branch manager across the floor. Within moments, a middle-aged man in a navy suit approached, his polished shoes tapping against the marble tiles. He glanced at the envelope, then at David, his brow furrowing with theatrical concern. "Sir," the manager said, his tone condescending, "we're going to need proof of where this money came from. 10,000 is unusual." David straightened, his shoulders. "Unusual for who?" he asked softly. The question hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The manager's jaw tightened. Instead of answering, he gestured toward the security guard. "Call the police," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for David and the growing audience to hear. The guard hesitated, but then nodded. A ripple of anticipation spread through the lobby. Phones came out discreetly. Some customers pretended to check messages while secretly recording the unfolding scene. David looked down at his envelope, then back at the teller and manager. His heartbeat was steady, his face unshaken. He picked up a pen from the counter and signed, the deposit slip with precise strokes, sliding it forward. "This is my money," he said firmly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "And you will deposit it," the manager sneered. "Not today. Not without a police report." At that moment, the guard returned, whispering, "They're on their way." David exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that steadied the storm inside. Him. His eyes swept across the lobby, the stares, the whispers, the invisible judgment pressing down on him. He tapped the envelope once on the counter, a symbolic gesture, like a gavel striking wood. "You're making a mistake," David said, his voice low but piercing. The manager chuckled, smug and certain. "We'll see about that." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, drawing closer. The teller crossed her arms, triumphant, as though she had personally delivered justice. The customers leaned in, eager to see what would happen next. David's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not of defeat but of knowing. He leaned slightly forward, meeting the teller's eyes with a calm intensity that unsettled her composure. "I'll speak," he whispered. "And when I do, everything will change." The automatic doors slid open as two police officers stepped inside, their badges glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. The chapter ended with a hush falling over the lobby. Silence heavy, With expectation, ignorance, and the weight of a truth no one yet knew. Hands where we can see them. The command cracked across the marble floor like a whip. Customers gasped, some clutching their purses, others stepping back instinctively. The two officers stormed into the bank, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other lean and sharp-eyed, both resting their palms on their holsters as if danger lurked in every corner. David did not move quickly, nor did he flinch. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hands from the counter, palms outward, his calm eyes fixed on the officers. His brown envelope of money sat untouched, still waiting to be deposited. The teller exhaled loudly, as if vindicated. "That's him," she cried, pointing toward David. "He tried to push through a suspicious deposit. $10,000 in cash. He got hostile when we asked questions." David tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze falling on her. Hostile? His lips didn't move, but his silence was louder than her accusation. The taller officer stepped forward. "Sir, step away from the counter, now." Whispers swirled around the lobby. A man in a suit whispered, "Knew it. Drug dealer." Another customer muttered, "Bet it's stolen." Phones were now openly raised, recording from multiple angles. The quiet hum of racism became a chorus. David's voice broke the noise, even and unshaken. "This is my money. I came to deposit it. That's all." The lean officer scoffed. "Then why's everyone here so nervous?" "Because you made them nervous," David replied, his tone like a scalpel, precise and cutting without needing volume. The bank manager approached the officers with false urgency. "We can't verify where the funds came from." He refused to provide details. "I refuse to provide details?" David asked, finally turning his head toward the man. His eyebrows rose slightly, almost amused. "No, I refuse to entertain your prejudice." The taller officer clenched his jaw. "Sir, turn around, hands behind your back." The weight of the command pressed into the air. Customers leaned closer, captivated by the unfolding spectacle. The teller smirked again, arms crossed, convinced. Justice was being served. David inhaled slowly, deeply, as if drawing power from the very tension around him. He turned, placing his hands calmly behind his back. The cold steel of the cuffs clicked shut with finality. Gasps scattered through the room. The elderly man near the exit muttered, "Finally." The young mother shielded her child's eyes, whispering, "See? Actions have consequences." But not everyone was convinced. A teenage boy in a hoodie whispered to his friend, "Why are they arresting him? He didn't even do anything." The taller officer gripped David's arm firmly. "You're under investigation for suspected fraud and possible money laundering." David chuckled softly, not out of humor but disbelief. "For depositing my own money?" The lean officer sneered. "We'll see whose money it really is." The officers began leading him toward the door. The envelope remained on the counter, untouched, as though abandoned. David glanced back once at it, then at the teller, whose smug expression trembled slightly under his steady gaze. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, not as a threat, but as a truth spoken into the air. The manager scoffed. Doubtful. As David was escorted past the customers, he saw their eyes. Some fearful, some judgmental, others quietly ashamed. A few couldn't meet his gaze at all. The teenage boy kept recording, his phone trembling slightly. Outside, the siren still wailed, bouncing off the glass walls of the bank. The officers pushed David toward the patrol car, their movements rehearsed, mechanical. But even in chains, David's posture never bent. He stood tall, his silence louder than their accusations. Before ducking into the back seat of the car, he turned his head slightly, his voice calm but cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Remember my face," he told the gathering crowd, "because the truth always walks back in." The words hung in the air as the car door slammed shut, the engine rumbling to life. Back inside, the teller finally exhaled in relief. "Good riddance," she muttered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed something else, doubt. And doubt, once planted, never stops growing. The room smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A single buzzing fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting sharp shadows across the gray walls. In the middle of the room sat a metal table with two chairs, one already occupied. David Carter sat handcuffed, his back straight, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. His calmness was almost unsettling, as if the cuffs around his wrists meant nothing. The taller officer, Sergeant Miller, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. The leaner one, Officer Grant, tossed a manila folder onto the table with unnecessary force. $10,000 in cash, Grant said, his tone heavy with accusation. People don't just walk into banks with that kind of money unless they're hiding something. David's eyes shifted toward him, calm and deliberate. People don't? His voice was low, even. Or people like me don't? The question pierced the air. For a moment, the officers exchanged a glance, unprepared for the precision of his words. Miller broke the silence. Where'd the money come from? David didn't rush. He leaned back slightly in the chair, the chain on his cuffs rattling, softly. Does it matter? Grant leaned forward, his fists pressing into the table. Yes, it matters. Was it drugs? Gambling? Stolen cash? David tilted his head, studying him like one might study a child throwing a tantrum. If I were white, he said slowly, would you even be asking those questions? Grant's face flushed red. Don't play the race card with me. David's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. You dealt the deck. Miller slammed his palm on the table, the sound echoing off the bare walls. Enough games. Tell us where it came from. David leaned forward now, his voice steady, deliberate. It came from my work, from sweat, from years of doing what most wouldn't. He paused. But I don't owe you an explanation. Grant sneered. You think sitting there calm makes you innocent? You think dignity's gonna save you? David's eyes didn't waver. Dignity is what saves me from becoming you. For the first time, Grant stepped back, visibly rattled. The fluorescent light hummed louder, filling the silence that followed. Miller tried to regain control. He flipped open the folder, pretending to read. We'll run background checks. We'll dig through every inch of your life. If there's dirt, we'll find it. David spoke quietly, almost to himself. Dig deep enough and you bury yourselves. The officers exchanged another glance, irritation mixed with something they wouldn't admit, unease. Outside the small window, detectives and junior officers peered in. Some shook their heads in silent agreement with Miller and Grant, but others, especially the younger ones, watched David with something different in their eyes. Curiosity, doubt. The interrogation dragged on. Same questions, same accusations. But David never raised his voice, never lost his composure. His answers were simple, sharp, and unshakable. Why so much cash? Because not everyone trusts your system. Why deposit it now? Because I decided it was time. What are you hiding? Nothing, but you are. Each exchange chipped away at their authority. Finally, Miller slammed the folder shut. We'll hold you overnight while we verify your story. David exhaled slowly, a measured breath. He leaned forward just enough to let his words carry weight. Hold me as long as you want, but when I speak, the walls of this room won't contain it, Grant scoffed, masking the unease in his eyes. Big words for a man in cuffs. David looked down at the steel binding his wrists, then back up with a calm intensity that made even Miller hesitate. Cuffs don't silence truth. They only amplify it. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Miller signaled to a junior officer. Take him to holding. As David was escorted out, the young officer guiding him couldn't help but glance sideways. There was no fear in David's face. No shame. Only patience, like a man waiting for the world to catch up to what he already knew. Back in the interrogation room, Miller muttered under his breath. He thinks he's untouchable. Grant shook his head. No. Worse. He thinks he's right. Neither of them realized. The cameras recording the entire session were already telling a story far larger than the one they thought they controlled. The holding cell was dim, its air heavy with the smell of sweat and rust. The concrete bench pressed cold against David's back as he sat, his hands now free of cuffs but his dignity still intact. Around him, several other men filled the silence with restless pacing, nervous muttering, and occasional bursts of laughter, to mask their unease. David, however, remained still, a calm center in the storm. A young man with tattoos creeping up his neck leaned forward from the opposite bench. "What they get you for, old man?" His tone was half curious, half mocking. David's eyes lifted slowly, meeting the man's gaze. "For daring to deposit my own money." The room chuckled. One man whistled low. "That's it? You gotta be kidding." But David's calm silence, the weight of his presence, smothered the laughter. The tattooed man blinked, suddenly less amused. "You serious?" David nodded once. Another detainee, older and weary, shook his head. "Doesn't surprise me. They see black skin and green money. They assume the two don't belong together." The words settled into the air, raw and bitter. A few men nodded quietly, their faces etched with stories untold. Across the cell, the officer on duty leaned against the bars, pretending to read a report. But his eyes kept drifting toward David, curiosity pulling at him. He was young, maybe mid-20s, his uniform too new, his posture too eager. Yet something in David's calm dignity seemed to unsettle him. David caught his gaze. "How long have you been wearing that badge?" The young officer shifted, startled. 2 years. "Long enough to know the weight of silence?" David said softly. The officer frowned, unsure how to respond. The tattooed man laughed again, though weaker this time. "Man, you talk like some preacher." David's eyes lowered briefly, then lifted again. "No. I talk like someone who's seen the truth. And the truth doesn't need volume." Silence followed, heavier than before. Even the restless pacing slowed. Outside the holding cell, the hum of activity filled the station. Phones rang, papers shuffled, boots clicked across the floor. But whispers had already begun to spread among the officers. "You hear about that guy they brought in?" "Yeah, the bank case. 10 grand cash. Manager swore it was shady, but I don't know. He doesn't look like the usual type. Doesn't matter what he looks like, money like that raises eyebrows. Still, something feels off, he's too calm." Back inside, the young officer unlocked the cell briefly to escort another detainee out. As he passed David, he hesitated, lowering his voice just enough to be heard. "What do you mean by truth?" David studied him carefully. The kind that doesn't hide behind uniforms. The kind that doesn't tremble under lights. The kind that speaks for itself. The officer swallowed, then quickly turned away, closing the cell with a loud clang. But his mind carried the words with him. Hours passed. The fluorescent lights dimmed slightly, signaling late evening. Some detainees dozed off. Others muttered quietly to themselves. David sat still, his breathing even, his patience unbroken. Finally, a detective appeared at the bars. He was older, grizzled, his tie loosened after a long shift. He looked at David with measured curiosity. "You, Carter, right?" David nodded. The detective opened the cell. "Come with me." As David rose, the tattooed man called after him. "Hey, preacher, when you get out, tell the world we're still waiting for justice." David paused at the doorway, turning slightly. His voice carried a weight that filled the small room. The world's already listening. It just doesn't realize it yet. The men in the cell exchanged glances, unsettled yet strangely hopeful. The young officer from earlier watched silently as David was escorted away. His chest tightened with something unfamiliar, not just doubt but respect. Outside the station, the night air was thick with murmurs. Word of the arrest had spread quickly, faster than the officers expected. A few reporters loitered near the entrance, cameras ready. Passers-by slowed to listen, whispering fragments of rumor. Black man arrested for cash deposit. $10,000, they say. Doesn't sound right. The seed of doubt once planted was already sprouting in the public eye. And David, walking calmly through the halls of the precinct, knew the moment of truth was drawing closer. Because silence, he understood, was never the absence of sound. It was the gathering of thunder before the storm. The detective's office was quieter than the interrogation room, but no less suffocating. Stacks of files leaned precariously on his desk, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke clung to the walls despite the "no smoking" sign. Detective Harris, a seasoned man with tired eyes, closed the door behind him. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." David complied, lowering himself into the chair with the same unshakable calm he had carried all day. His wrists were free now, but the weight of suspicion hung in the air like chains. Harris dropped a thin folder onto the desk. "David Carter, age 42, no criminal record, stable address, but $10,000 in cash?" He leaned forward, his voice dripping with skepticism. "That's a red flag." David clasped his hands loosely on his lap. "A red flag for who?" "For me," Harris replied flatly. David's lips twitched in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Then maybe you're looking at the wrong flag." The detective frowned. "Where did the money come from?" "From me." "Don't play games, Carter. You think staying calm makes you untouchable?" David leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. "What makes me untouchable is truth. And the truth doesn't bend just because you want it to." Harris's patience thinned. He slapped the folder shut. "You've got one chance to cooperate before this gets worse." David sat back, exhaling slowly. His eyes, steady as stone, met the detective's. "Then I'll use that chance for one call." The detective arched an eyebrow. "Who are you? Calling?" David didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the desk phone. Harris hesitated, then slid it across to him with a grunt. The room fell silent as David dialed. Each beep of the buttons echoed like a drumbeat. Harris crossed his arms, expecting the call to a lawyer or maybe a relative. But when the line connected, David's tone shifted. Calm, yet carrying a quiet authority that commanded respect. "It's Carter. They've made a mistake." The voice on the other end responded quickly, firm and clear. Though Harris couldn't hear the words, he felt the shift in atmosphere instantly. David continued. "Yes, at the precinct. I'll wait." He placed the receiver back down gently, as though it were a gavel striking wood. Then he folded his hands again and looked at Harris with unnerving calm. "Who was that?" Harris demanded. David didn't answer. Not directly. "You'll find out soon enough." The detective's jaw tightened. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle. "You think one call is going to save you?" David's voice cut cleanly, through the room. "Not save me. Reveal you." For the first time that night, Detective Harris felt something he hadn't expected. Unease. Moments later, outside the office, the young officer from earlier hurried past. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends and family. The story of a black man arrested for depositing his own money had already hit social media. Short clips recorded by bank customers were spreading fast. Bank arrest. Justice for David, 10,000 truth. The whispers had grown into a storm. Reporters gathered at the station doors, their cameras blinking red like watchful eyes. Inside, Harris tried to mask his nerves with paperwork. "Whatever stunt you're pulling, it won't work here." David's reply was simple, steady. "Truth isn't a stunt, it's a mirror, and soon everyone will see themselves in it." A knock rattled the office door. Harris frowned, irritated. "What now?" A junior officer peeked in, nervous. "Sir, someone's here to see him." Harris's brow furrowed. "At this hour? Who?" The officer hesitated, then swallowed. "You should probably come see for yourself." Harris glanced at David, whose calm expression hadn't wavered once. For the first time, Harris felt the weight of control slipping from his hands. As David rose from his chair, the chains of suspicion didn't bind him. They shattered. The detective watched, unsettled, as David walked past him with the steady stride of a man who knew exactly where this path would lead. And outside the office, the storm was already waiting. The precinct lobby buzzed louder than usual, a low hum of activity laced with tension. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and officers exchanged whispers that carried the weight of unease. But all of it quieted when the glass doors slid open. A woman stepped in. Her presence alone made the room still. She wore a tailored navy suit, her posture straight, her stride purposeful. Her badge, clipped neatly to her belt, caught the fluorescent light. "Special Agent Williams, FBI," she announced, flashing her identification with swift precision. Her voice was firm, steady, and left no room for doubt. Every head turned. Officers shifted in their chairs, some standing instinctively straighter. The desk sergeant blinked, caught off guard. Agent Williams. What brings you? I'm here for David Carter," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "Where is he?" the sergeant stammered, glancing nervously toward the hall. "He's, in with Detective Harris. Take me there," she ordered. As they walked, whispers rippled across the precinct. FBI? For him? The young officer from earlier felt his pulse quicken. He remembered David's words. The truth doesn't tremble under lights. Down the hall, Detective Harris was still fuming, flipping through the thin file on his desk when the door burst open. Agent Williams strode in, her presence filling the room before she even spoke. "Detective Harris," she said crisply, "you've made a mistake." Harris bristled, standing. "Excuse me? And who exactly are you?" She held up her badge again, the letters FBI gleaming under the harsh light. "Special Agent Williams, and the man you've detained illegally is under federal protection." The room went silent. Harris's face flushed. Federal protection? For what? David, seated calmly across the desk, finally spoke. His voice was soft but carried a weight that silenced everything else. "I told you the truth would reveal itself." Agent Williams stepped closer, her gaze locking on Harris. "Did you even bother to verify his identity before throwing him in a cell?" Harris stiffened. "We were following protocol. Large cash deposits." "Protocol?" she snapped. "Or prejudice?" The words landed like a hammer. Harris's mouth opened, but no defense came out. The young officer watching from the doorway swallowed hard, his face pale. Williams turned back to David. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the delay. You're free to leave. Your presence is required elsewhere." Harris blinked in disbelief. "Free to leave? Just like that?" David rose slowly, his composure unbroken. He adjusted his sleeves as though preparing for a meeting, not walking out of a cell. "Just like that," he said calmly. Harris slammed his palm on the desk. "You can't just walk him out. He's under investigation." Williams turned sharply, her voice like steel. "No, he's under protection. Federal. Which means he was never yours to arrest." The silence that followed was suffocating. Harris's arrogance crumbled under the weight of her authority. The truth was no longer something he could shape with suspicion. It was standing right in front of him. As Williams guided David toward the door, the young officer caught his eye. For a brief moment, David paused, his calm gaze meeting the rookie's uncertain one. "Remember," David said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Dignity is louder than fear." The officer swallowed hard, nodding slightly, the words etching themselves into his memory. When they reached the lobby, the crowd of reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched toward them. Questions flew in every direction. Why was he arrested? Is it true it was over a bank deposit? Who is David Carter? Williams raised a hand, silencing the frenzy with practiced authority. "Mr. Carter has no statement at this time. All I will say is this. He should never have been arrested tonight." The words sent a shockwave through the room. Murmurs erupted, reporters scribbling furiously. The narrative had already begun to change. David stood beside her, calm as ever, his silence speaking louder than any headline. And as the cameras captured his unflinching presence, the seeds of prejudice that had led to his arrest began to rot under the weight of public scrutiny. The storm was only beginning, and David knew exactly how to weather it. The precinct had never felt so heavy. The tension lingered in the air long after Agent Williams escorted David into the corridor. Reporters, questions still echoed faintly from outside, muffled by the glass doors. Inside, silence stretched like a wound no one wanted to touch. Detective Harris slammed his fist onto his desk, papers scattering. "Federal protection?" he barked, pacing like a caged animal. "Since when does some random man making a deposit qualify for federal protection?" The young officer who had been watching from the doorway shifted uneasily. His mind replayed every detail. David's calmness, Williams's authority, the undeniable truth in her voice. Something about it gnawed at him, but he couldn't piece it together yet. Meanwhile, in the lobby, David walked calmly beside Agent Williams. His composure was almost eerie, as if this entire ordeal had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. His eyes didn't dart nervously, nor did he flinch at the flashing cameras. He moved like a man who knew he belonged in every room he entered. Williams leaned toward him as they walked. "You handled that well," she said quietly. David gave a faint smile. "I've dealt with worse, besides storms always clear eventually." When they reached the waiting car outside, Williams gestured for him to get in. But before David stepped inside, he turned to face the throng of reporters pressing against the barricades. Their cameras zoomed, microphones stretched out like hungry claws. "Mr. Carter," one shouted, "were you falsely arrested? Are you suing the department?" Another demanded. "What was the $10,000 for?" A third pressed. David paused, his gaze sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. Then, finally he spoke. "I believe in the truth," he said, his voice steady but resonant. "And the truth has a way of finding its light. Tonight was not about money, it was about something much deeper, and you will all know soon enough." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted over one another, desperate for clarity. But David stepped gracefully into the car, leaving them buzzing with more questions than answers. Inside, Williams studied him curiously. "You didn't have to say anything," she remarked. "I know," David replied, his eyes fixed out the window. "But sometimes silence feeds the wrong story." Back at the precinct, Harris raged in his office. "Find out who he is," he snapped at his team. "I want every detail, every scrap of his life on my desk tonight. Nobody just waltzes in here with the FBI at their side unless they're hiding something big." The young officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, what if he's not hiding? Anything? What if he's exactly who he says he is?" Harris whipped around, his glare sharp enough to cut. "Don't get soft on me, kid. Everyone has a weakness, and I'll find his." But the rookie wasn't convinced. The way David had looked at him earlier, the calm authority in his words, it was unlike anything he'd seen in the suspects who usually came through these doors. Later that night, as Harris buried himself in files, the young officer snuck into the records room. His curiosity burned brighter than his fear of disobedience. He typed David Carter's name into the federal database, heart pounding as the screen loaded, and then it appeared. His eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. The screen displayed not a criminal record, but a sealed file stamped with bold, red letters, classified, federal clearance required. He leaned closer, trying to process. Only a handful of people in the nation carried such files. It wasn't just secrecy, it was protection, the kind reserved for individuals of immense importance. The officer's hands trembled. He whispered under his breath, "Who are you, David Carter?" Meanwhile, David's car glided through the city streets. Neon lights streaked across the windows, casting fleeting shadows on his calm face. He sat in silence, his hands folded neatly, his mind working quietly behind his composed exterior. Williams finally broke the silence. "They'll keep digging. Harris won't let this go." David turned slightly, his eyes steady. "Let him dig. The deeper he digs, the closer he'll get to the truth, and the truth will undo him." Williams studied him for a moment. "You sound awfully confident." David's faint smile returned, the same quiet strength that had carried him through the chaos. "Confidence isn't the word," he said softly. "It's certainty." The car disappeared into the night, carrying its secret passenger away from the flashing cameras, leaving behind a precinct full of confusion, a city buzzing with questions, and a detective whose obsession was only beginning to consume him. The revelation was near, and when it came, the world would not be ready. Detective Harris's office looked like a war zone. Papers covered the floor, half-drunk coffee cups lined. The desk and his tie hung loose around his neck. He hadn't gone home, he hadn't even blinked properly in hours. His obsession with David Carter was devouring him. "Sir," one of his men said timidly from the doorway, "you've been at this all night." Harris's eyes burned red. "And I'll stay here all week if I have to. No one makes a fool of me in my own precinct. No one." The young rookie lingered in the hallway, torn. He'd seen the classified file earlier. He hadn't told Harris yet. His gut screamed at him to stay quiet, because whatever David Carter was, Harris was messing with forces far bigger than the precinct. But Harris wasn't listening to anyone. He pulled out surveillance photos, bank records, and every scrap of information he could find. But David's life was clean. Too clean. It was like chasing a ghost. Finally, Harris slammed the drawer shut and barked, "We'll follow the money. People can fake identities, but they can't fake transactions." Meanwhile, across the city, David sat in a quiet cafe with Agent Williams. The morning light streamed through the blinds, casting warm stripes across his face. He looked calm, but Williams could feel the weight he carried. "You know he won't stop," Williams said, sipping her coffee. "Harris will tear apart the city looking for dirt on you." David stirred his tea slowly, his eyes distant. "Let him. Men like Harris reveal more about themselves the harder they push. His rage will be his undoing." Williams tilted her head. "You talk like you've seen this before." David met her gaze. "Because I have." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Williams leaned forward, lowering her voice. "David, sooner or later, they'll connect the dots. And when they do, you won't have the luxury of silence anymore. You'll have to speak." David exhaled slowly, as if carrying a burden that had lived with him for years. "When the time is right," he said. "Not before." Back at the precinct, Harris's digging finally led to something. A flagged report. A bank transfer from 2 years ago. The name wasn't David Carter, but the initials matched. And the amount? Enormous. Harris's pulse quickened. "Got you," he muttered. He stormed into the rookie's corner. "Pull me every file on Carter's past 10 years. Employment, travel, every alias he's ever used. I don't care if it's sealed, I want it cracked open." The rookie froze. "Sir, some of those files are above clearance." "Then break the clearance," Harris roared. "Don't give me excuses." The rookie swallowed hard. He knew what Harris didn't. Clearance levels weren't just bureaucratic red tape. They were shields. Shields built for people the government wanted untouchable. Still, he obeyed. Hours later, he slid a thin folder across Harris's desk. Inside was a heavily redacted document, pages blacked out, lines erased. But what remained was enough to make Harris's eyes widen. One phrase was visible, stamped across the top. "Special Witness Protection. Federal Priority." Harris's throat went dry. "Witness protection?" he whispered. "What the hell did this guy see?" His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Even with most of the details missing, fragments jumped out. Testimony, organized crime, federal sting operation, high-level clearance. Harris leaned back, his mind spinning. He had been treating David like a petty criminal, a liar with a lucky streak. But this wasn't a small-time suspect. This was someone who had stood against something massive and lived. And yet Harris couldn't let go. Instead of fear, his obsession deepened. "If the feds are hiding him," he growled, "then he's hiding something worth knowing, and I'll be the one to expose it." That night, the rookie sat alone in the locker room staring at the floor. His conscience weighed heavy. He'd seen the red stamps, the secrecy. He knew Harris was walking into dangerous territory. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. He never thought he'd write, "Mr. Carter. I think you're in danger." Detective Harris won't stop. His finger hovered, trembling, before finally pressing send. Across the city, David's phone buzzed on the cafe table. He read the message silently, his face unreadable. Williams leaned over. "Who is it?" "David." Slid the phone back into his pocket. "Just someone who realized the storm is already here." Williams frowned. "And what are you going to do?" David looked out the window, his eyes calm but heavy with purpose. "Wait. The storm only matters if it touches me. But soon." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They'll realize the storm has always belonged to me." The cafe door opened, the bell jingling as new customers walked in. But to David it sounded like the toll of a clock counting down. Time was running out. Detective Harris's hands shook as he gripped the redacted file. The words, "Special Witness Protection," screamed at him louder than any alarm. He couldn't stop, reading the fragments again and again. Organized crime. Testimony. Federal sting. Witness protection, he muttered to himself, pacing the room. "That's what you are, Carter. But why? Why would the feds guard you like treasure?" The rookie officer entered cautiously. "Sir, maybe we should back off. If the FBI finds out we're digging into sealed files..." Harris whirled on him, fury blazing in his eyes. "Back off? You think I'm going to back off now? This man humiliated me in my own precinct. He stood in front of cameras and made me look like a fool. I'll burn every clearance wall they put up until I know who he really is." The rookie's jaw tightened. His warning had been ignored. Deep down, he knew Harris wasn't just after answers anymore. He was after revenge. Meanwhile, David sat alone in his apartment, a small, sparsely decorated place that revealed nothing about the man who lived there. He stared at a single photograph on the table, a younger version of himself shaking hands with a suited official. The official's face had been torn out of the picture, leaving only David's calm smile behind. His phone buzzed again. A second message from the rookie. "He's not stopping. He'll come for you directly." David set the phone down, exhaling slowly. He whispered into the empty room, then let him. Across town, Harris was unraveling. He stormed into the captain's office, demanding more resources, but the captain cut him off sharply. "Drop it, Harris, do you hear me? The FBI's involved. This isn't your case anymore." But Harris's obsession was beyond orders. He clenched his fists, barely containing his rage. "With all due respect, Captain, I don't take orders from fear. That man is hiding something, and I'll expose it, even if it kills me." The Captain's silence told Harris everything. He was on his own. That night, Harris followed David. He parked his car across from the apartment building, waiting in the shadows, watching every flicker of light through the blinds. His breathing grew shallow, his mind clouded with obsession. At the same time, Williams was on the phone with her superior. "Harris is pushing too far. If he digs any deeper, he'll blow the entire cover." A stern voice replied, "Then move, Carter. Keep him out of sight until the trial resumes." But David, sitting calmly in his apartment, seemed unmoved by the idea of escape. When Williams arrived to escort him, he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Running now would only feed Harris's narrative. The truth must confront him face to face. That's the only way this ends." Williams looked at him like he was insane. "You're walking into fire, David." "Sometimes," David replied softly. "The fire is the only thing that reveals the gold." Across the street, Harris's patience snapped. He stepped out of his car, pulling his jacket tight against the night air. His footsteps echoed on the pavement as he crossed toward the building. The rookie, watching remotely through a tapped camera feed, felt his stomach twist. Harris wasn't supposed to be there. This was beyond procedure, beyond reason. Inside the apartment, David stood near the window. He could feel Harris's presence before he saw him. Calmly, he adjusted his tie in the reflection of the glass, as though preparing for an audience. Moments later, a loud knock rattled the door. "Carter!" Harris's voice thundered from the hallway. "Open this door now." Williams stiffened, reaching for her badge. "He's lost his mind. He can't be here without a warrant." David raised a hand, stopping her. His eyes never left the door. Let him in. Williams's jaw dropped. Are you serious? David's voice was steady. He won't believe anything until he sees it himself. The knock came again, harder this time. Open up or I break it down. David walked calmly to the door, unlatched the lock and pulled it open. Harris stormed in, eyes wild, fists clenched. Who are you, Carter? He roared. What are you hiding? Tell me or so help me. But the words caught in his throat. As David stepped closer, his calm presence pressing against Harris's fury like an immovable wall. You want the truth? David said quietly, his eyes piercing. Then you'd better be ready for what it costs. Harris's face twisted with rage, but beneath it, for the first time, a flicker of fear. The room fell into silence, heavy with the weight of revelation, hovering just out of reach. The breaking point had come, and the next moment would change everything. Tell me who you are, Harris shouted, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow. His voice cracked under the weight of obsession, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling with a fury that was slowly becoming fear. David stood still, calm as stone. His silence cut sharper than any scream. His eyes, dark and unwavering, met Harris's, wild glare with an unshakable dignity. Williams stepped between them, her badge raised. Detective Harris, you're out of line. You have no warrant, no authority. Shut up! Harris barked, but his voice faltered. His authority, the thing he clung to all his life, was slipping through his fingers. David finally spoke, his voice measured and heavy with gravity. You want the truth, Harris? You think you're ready for it? Then listen carefully, because once it's spoken, there's no going back. The room went quiet. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. I testified, David said slowly, each word deliberate. I testified against one of the most dangerous crime syndicates this country has ever seen. Men who thought they owned judges, politicians, even the police. I stood in a courtroom when no one else dared, and I told the world what I saw. Harris's face froze. The rookie officer, listening from his remote feed, whispered. Oh my God, David continued. That testimony put half their empire in prison, and it nearly cost me my life. The government put me in protection, gave me a new identity, because the men I spoke against swore revenge. I wasn't just a witness, Harris, I was the key, the spine of their downfall. He paused, his eyes narrowing. So when you dragged me into your precinct, mocked me in front of cameras, accused me of fraud, what you really did was spit on a man who risked everything so this city could breathe free. Harris's hands trembled. His rage collapsed into disbelief. No, you're lying. This is another trick. Williams stepped forward, her voice cold. He's not lying. I was there. I've read the sealed files. David Carter isn't just a man. He's the witness who saved an entire city from bloodshed. Without him, those syndicates would still own half this town. Harris staggered back as if struck. His entire body shook. That's not possible. David took a step closer. His presence seemed to fill the room, towering over Harris without ever raising his voice. And do you know why I deposited that $10,000? It wasn't dirty money. It wasn't fraud. It was compensation, the government finally releasing a small portion of the fund set aside for my safety. The money you thought was suspicious was nothing more than the price of survival. The rookie officer's voice cracked over the radio. Sir, I checked it myself. The transfer was from the Department of Justice. It's all real. It's all legitimate. Harris's knees weakened. He sank into a chair, his face pale. The walls he had built around his pride, his authority, his superiority, they crumbled in an instant. David's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. Do you see it now, detective? Your arrogance blinded you. Your prejudice chained you. You wanted to see a criminal because of the color of my skin, not the truth of my story. And now the truth has spoken. The room buzzed with silence. For Harris, it was louder than any siren. Williams pulled out her phone, dialing swiftly. This precinct will hear about tonight. Your career, Harris, it's finished. But Harris didn't fight. He couldn't. His shoulders slumped, his face buried in his hands. For the first time in his life, he had no words, no defense. The rookie walked in minutes later, unable to stay away. He looked at David with awe, then at Harris with quiet disgust. "Sir," he said to Harris, "you didn't just arrest an innocent man. You arrested a hero." David turned toward the door, his coat draped neatly over his arm. "I'm no hero," he said softly. "I just refused to stay silent when silence meant death." He looked back at Harris one last time. "You wanted me to speak, detective. Now I have, and those words will echo long after you're gone." Outside, the reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed as David stepped out of the building, flanked by Williams. The crowd erupted with questions, but David raised his hand. The noise quieted almost instantly, his voice carried with a quiet power. "Tonight I was arrested for depositing money that was mine. But this story isn't about money, it's about judgment. Too often men like me are seen as criminals before we are seen as human. But I stand here today not as a suspect, not as a victim, but as a witness to truth, a witness to what dignity can endure." The crowd listened in stunned silence. "Let this be clear," David continued, his eyes sweeping across the cameras. "No man's worth is measured by the suspicion of another. Justice is not the property of uniforms or titles. It belongs to truth. And truth has spoken." A hush settled over the street. Reporters stood frozen, unable to scribble fast enough. Citizens watching live on television leaned closer to their screens, moved by a calm strength that no handcuffs could contain. David turned, stepping into the waiting car. As the door closed, Williams leaned toward him. "You didn't just clear your name tonight, you made history." David's eyes were steady, his voice quiet. "History only matters if it teaches. Let's hope they've learned." The car pulled away, leaving the crowd buzzing with awe and Harris alone in the precinct, drowning in the ruins of his pride. For him, silence was now the loudest sound of all. And for David Carter, the man arrested for depositing $10,000, the truth had finally spoken, louder than prejudice, louder than hate, louder than fear. Justice had found its voice.